The Octarine Tree, a podcast exploring the meaning of ecology, spirit and human relationship. From southwestern Australia, I'm your host, Byron Joel. G'day, welcome back to the Octarine Tree podcast. Today's episode features a dear friend of mine and mentor of mine, Australian regenerative agricultural designer Darren Doherty. Darren, with his wife Lisa and eldest daughter Isabella, run Regrarians. I've been following the work of Darren and Regrarians for a number of years now, and in my opinion, Darren is the world's best broad-scale regenerative agricultural designer. He's taught me a great deal, and the work he does with Regrarians is amazing. He's got such a keen mind, and I feel a really refreshing balance between progressive and more traditional ways of thinking and doing things. As recognised as Darren is the world over by those in the circles of like permaculture, holistic management, regenerative agriculture in general, I still think he's vastly underappreciated. He's something of a national treasure. I do urge anyone listening to this to head to the website regrarians.org. Check out their stuff, the Regrarians Handbook, well worth a look for the practitioners in particular of regenerative agriculture. It's the place to go. It's the one main, if you had to buy one publication on regenerative agriculture, particularly from a kind of applied angle, then that would be the place to go. In this chat we talk about all sorts of different things: homemade mustard, Darren's Irish heritage, the early years of permaculture in Australia, of which Darren had something of a front row seat, almost being the protege in many ways of Bill Mollison and working with David Holmgren, the pedagogy of regenerative agriculture, contemporary Australian folk culture and lack thereof, and many other things. My insomnia cycles kicked in apparently, so I had bugger all sleep last night, and I think you can tell in this recording I'm pretty flat, to be honest. Despite my keen interest in the subject matters, my tone's pretty flat, but other than that, it went really well. So without further ado, my friend and mentor, Darren Doherty. Darren Doherty of Regrarians fame and fortune. Darren Doherty is known to the world as, or Darren O'Doherty to the insiders, or Daz. O'Doherty, pardon me. Daz to your friends, and Darren Donut Doherty to my children. Mm-hmm. They still refer to you as that. How are you? Welcome to the Octarine Tree podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Byron. And yes, you can tell your children that the donut is going really well.
I'm glad.
The donut lives in a cafe now, so because that's where Regrarians finds itself headquartered here in beautiful Castlemaine at the Creamtown complex.
That's going all right, given the current context and circumstances of like kind of reduced, limited patronage.
Patronage, yes. It's patronising of you to say that about our patronage.
Yeah.
But no, it's going quite well. We opened, in fact, there's even an article on it. How do you start a cafe or something in the middle of a pandemic? So this initiative was born out of COVID, and our kids lost their jobs. Two of them lost their jobs while working here, one of them full time, and so it became an opportunity to take up, and it's sort of taken on a life of its own. And it's become a hub of all sorts.
Yeah, well, it makes perfect sense. I mean, you with your background in hospitality and your interest and background in agriculture, which we'll get into, you guys, Regrarians itself is something of a hub, if an intellectual one, of so many different things. Would you give us, for those who aren't familiar with you, for the minimum of people out there in internet land who haven't heard of Darren Doherty and Regrarians, would you give us the elevator pitch?
Oh, well, I'm distinctly unhospitable when it comes to elevator pitches. I usually ignore people. But No, well, Regrarians is a non-profit that was founded in 2013, and we've been working in the sort of farm planning space since March the 6th, 1993. So we're coming up 28 years in a couple of weeks, or a few weeks. We these days seek to work with people who are looking to plan their farms, and we've developed participatory and very DIY methods of doing so through the agency of a digital space called the Regrarians Workplace. And that allows us to, well, as I put it, have a whole community of practice support you to develop your farm plans. Whereas for a long time, I developed a lot of farm plans for a lot of people and sort of took that role away from them. And now we've sort of gone back to how farm planning started, and that's where people had people like me and others around them facilitate that process. So that's what we're doing these days, as well as you mentioned, we've branched it back into hospitality, and with the Creamtown Initiative, which is an arts hub, and it's really become a creatives hub. So we have quite a few people who come here every day and use this as their workplace, their physical workplace,
right?
And meet, greet, and a lot of Castlemaine is a very creative place. So it's well situated for that, and we only serve organic, biodynamic, biologically progressive, or food from organic BD, biological progressive producers in this region. And
Actual food,
yeah. And we pretty well make everything here. I mean, I make the mustard.
Really?
You look at it and you go, I bought a jar of mustard one day, and you look at it and go, how hard can this be? So you go onto YouTube, you just go on the phone and you go, oh, it's actually that easy. And when you make it, it literally takes me a minute and a half to make, a lot of mustard.
Do you use the leaf or the seed?
No, the seed, yeah. That's seeded. I make Dijon mustard.
Aficionado is far too strong a term, but me and mustard get along real well.
I buy the seed. I buy organic yellow and brown mustards.
Right.
And I combine them together 50-50. And if you come in a little closer, I'll just give you the recipe. It's a very simple one. Yeah, it's 6 tablespoons of mustard seed, 1/3 of a cup of organic Chardonnay. I've found is the best. Bit of Chardy. Yeah. I've tried Sauv Blanc and a few others. The first one I used, Lisa, my wife, got very upset with me because she said that was $30, and I was using it to make the mustard. So anyway, I resolved to getting some lower cost local Australian Chardonnay.
There's nothing wrong with Chardonnay. There's nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong with it. Lovely grape. And 1/3 of a cup of we get the fruit fetish apple cider vinegar, and then a bit of salt and a bit of a bit of pepper, and a spoon of caramelized onions.
Oh yeah,
which I've developed a very fine method for making, and put that together. You put it into a little plastic container or jar overnight, and then bar mix it or blend it or whatever the next day to the consistency that you would like to have. You can make the seeds disappear into a aqueous blend, or you can have the sort of seeded mustard look.
I don't mind either. I personally like a seedy mustard.
But be aware, the first aroma makes you realise that mustard is a very potent.
Oh my word!
Material, and we know that a lot of people suffered from its ill use in the First World War.
My great grandfather died from mustard gas inhalation.
Yeah. Well, I was just reading about that. I'm reading nearly finished the biography of JBS Haldane, who was one of the great scientists of Britain, and And his father worked a lot on gas masks in World War One, when his son, the great JBS, was in the trenches, enjoying himself evidently. But that's a whole other story, Byron, and there are so many.
Well, mustard. Well, now we've covered the important stuff. Thank you, Darren Doherty of Agrarians. It's been a pleasure having you.
No worries, mate. You've got the recipe.
Yeah.
Just between us.
Yes. So, Castlemaine, you're a Central Victorian kind of guy, aren't you? Born and raised and bred.
But as the bumper sticker here says, there's no R in Castle. So it's a lovely place, and Lisa and I were looking to move down here when we first got together in '91, and when we got pregnant with Isabella, Lisa's mum pleaded with us not to leave Bendigo, which is half an hour up the road, and Bendigo gets about 20 frosts a year, and Castlemaine gets 60.
Really?
So the best citrus you can do here is a Maya lemon in a movable pot. So I have to go to my mum's to get lemons. It's terrible. So
really,
yeah.
I didn't realise it was that pronounced a difference. Just down.
Yeah, well, it's like this. It's a little topographically. It's the convergence of two pretty big creeks which come together, Barker Creek and Forest Creek. And Castlemaine was originally known as Forest Creek, and it was the richest alluvial gold field in the world and ever. So it's a classic gold rush town, and then became an industrial town. And the railway line between Bendigo and Melbourne goes through here. And so it's grown into this gentrified outlet of Melbourne. It's called North Northcote because I think there's more cafes here than people.
Sounds like Fremantle.
Yeah, but it's about an hour and 10 on the train. But a lot of people commute from here, and so it's got quite expensive real estate. But it's a vibrant population, and it's a good mix of people. It's got a lot of people who are tradespeople here, and then it's got the self-funded retiree crowd and the young professionals who commute and so on. So yeah, it's a good place. I like it because it reminds me of Bendigo was when I was a kid. It's not as busy as Bendigo's got too busy for me now.
Well, my first time in Castlemaine was at the during the Rex, which was the Rad at that point.
Yeah.
And we went to Dan Palmer's place.
That big oak tree in the back here.
His big oak tree. Yeah, there's a photo of us all under that oak tree. But the piece de la resistance was the Quercus macrocarpa, the bur oak.
Yes, on Barker Street. Well, I can see that through my window.
Really well. I remember just about fainting because it was the perfect time of year, late summer, early autumn. I forget the actual month, but it was in fruit.
I think it was in May. Yeah, it was in May.
Yeah. At any rate, I accidentally went home with some acorns.
That's amazing how they fall into your pocket if you stand under the tree for long enough.
Yeah, it actually they fell into my boots, and I didn't realise what was going on, and I got home, and anyway.
Did they survive? Did they grow into something magnificent?
Yeah. They did. They're a magnificent tree. The fruit on them is considerable. So you are from a serious pedigree of Irish heritage. Can you explain your use of the name O'Doherty? Did I get it right? I always muck that up.
O'Doherty. It's no point you trying, but that's okay.
All right, sorry. It's my Slavic blood.
That's right. It's whatever blood you choose on the day, but no, I'm about 50% Irish from what the DNA says on today. Anyway, a little bit of Cornish and tiniest bit of Pom, but I think that's transient Pom, and like a lot of people who go through that place. And the rest is from Schleswig-Holstein, which is been Denmark, been German. I think it's German at the moment. Anyway, O'Doherty, it's been a bit controversial. It does mean destructive, which for someone who is in the regeneration business is, perhaps a bit of a misnomer, but, I shouldn't carry that burden. But it also, there was a rumour that it meant, which is still pops around, that it's men of oak houses.
Oh, I'd run with that one.
No. So
are we talking, is this Irish Gaelic? Is that right?
Yeah. So the O'Dohertys still own the northernmost tip of Ireland, which is a peninsula called Inishawn. And it's all O'Doherty there. Donegal is the O'Doherty.
Daru, or Daro and Daru, is the Indo-European root word for oak. That could be how and where it slides in.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
I
love a good oak tree, as you do, Mr. Oak Tree.
Yeah, I got a thing for him. It's actually verging on obsessive. Your story in terms of the development of your interest and practice in all things agricultural. You went to Bendigo High?
I attended Bendigo High, yeah. 38% of the time, according to the year level coordinator.
Right, okay. Just enough to sneak through.
Well, Bendigo High is right next to Roslyn Park, which is a beautiful park filled with, that was planted, I'm going to say, in the 1880s or so, influenced heavily, as many were, by Baron Ferdinand von Mueller, who you'd be aware of course.
Great name.
The government botanist back in the gold mining period in the colony of Victoria, and it's a magnificent park. And so Bendigo High is a senior high, and so all of us, it was like a convergence of all the kids who went to the different high schools, years 7 to 10, would then either go to tech school or you would go to Bendigo High. So it was like this convergence of all of the kids of Bendigo, including refugees from the Catholic and grammar school, who decided that, not wearing a uniform and being in a school in town, being in a senior
novel
campus. Pretty novel. It was sort of almost, I suppose, like a pre-university atmosphere.
Was it agriculturally themed?
No, none whatsoever.
None. Okay.
No, it was a completely concrete school. There's no oval or anything there.
Okay.
There was a tennis court. I think that was about the broadest expanse that was there.
Did you have any inclination at that stage that you would head down the path that you're in?
No, none whatsoever. None whatsoever.
When do you recall a penny dropping, or in retrospect, was there a moment that's defining? Or
I think, well, when I was it was incremental, because I was awfully itinerant. Like a lot of kids my age. I was just interested in smoking pot, drinking beer, partying, being with my mates, playing footy, and going to nightclubs and all that sort of stuff in that period. And then, I was terrible at school. I didn't turn up because I was at the pub or in the park just hanging out. And so that when I finished year 12, which meant I just went through to the end of that year and failed miserably, then the next year I went up to Queensland with a bunch of mates and just hung out for a year. And then the next year I got a job at the Eagle Hawk restaurant, which was it had a good food guide hat, which is, at that time, I think it was the only country Victorian restaurant that had a hat. And I was working with a fantastic couple, Gordon Richards and his wife, Janine Knoll, and they were he was a chef, she was a great front of house person, and they were one of those great dynamic duos. And that was the first time, I suppose, that I made the food farm connection, because we were getting a lot of product from a lot of really great farmers in central Victoria. And then I stayed in hospitality for quite a few years. And it was when I was in Tasmania working at the International Hotel in Launceston, which we opened. And I was a chef d'orong there, cooking at tables. Very young executive chef, a guy who's still quite a well-known chef now, Brett Hansen, and he He had a real local organic theme, and that was in Launceston. So this is in about 1988 or so. And yeah, we were buying a lot of stuff from the farmers, and they were coming in and dropping their stuff off and so on. And then I left hospitality and got a job at the organic greengrocer in Bendigo. So I moved home, got a job there. Actually, no, I moved out to my nana and granddad's farm outside of Bendigo, and I was working there at the farm looking after them and their all that they had going on as they got older, at the same time as running this shop. And that gave me that was the sort of the final segue into the career that I had, because that's when I started to provide advice. Well, I'd get the IP of one farmer because I was actually going on, I was a buyer. So I'd go on to their farms and we'd talk about their production systems and blah, blah, blah. And then I'd pass it, and then they'd say, oh, what's so-and-so doing about growing his carrots or growing his beeves or growing his pigs or whatever? And I'd say, oh, look, I can't really tell you, however.
Rumour has it.
Rumour has it. And then also customers at the shop, some of them would have a little acreage or something like that, and they'd say, oh, and we'd start talking about their acreage over time. I mean, you build relationships with people at the counter.
Yeah, you do indeed.
And the conversations get beyond how much of the lettuce is today, or this is $49.95 today. That's thank you very much. It gets to what's your life and what are you growing and da 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 da. So it's all sort of this incremental path, and so I started getting invited out to people's properties to go and have a cup of tea or a glass of wine and walk around and scratch the soil, and then it became a sort of what should go here and what should go there sort of program, and off we went from there, and that's what I've continued to do to this day.
Okay. And when do you recall the first time that you discovered the likes of permaculture in particular, or the first time that you met old Bill Mollison?
Well, they're two separate times.
Yeah.
The first time I had read about permaculture, I'm going to say, was probably in about 1980. Yeah, it was probably in Tassie, probably 87, 88. I've always been a magazine, well, back then at least, before the internet, people of my age, and I suppose yours, we used to buy magazines because that was the internet.
Yeah.
Then. And so I was buying the Organic Grower magazine and this, that and the other, and this permaculture stuff, and Acres Australia and a fefew other things, I can't remember exactly, but there was a few bits like that. And one of my mates, who's since passed, old Peter Crutchfield, he was we called him a hippie. But anyway, Crutchy, he had a copy of One Straw Revolution.
Right.
And I've still got his copy because he's dead and I can't give it back to him. But but I offered it to his son.
Yeah, all right.
He's a mate, so I'm off the hook.
Okay.
Anyway, Crutchy gave me this, and I went, oh, and I was out at my grandparents, and I was reading through, and blah blah blah. The whole One Straw Revolution thing was that was a key piece in my journey, because
and it's one of those texts. Nowadays there are permaculture books and there are regen ag books, and once upon a time, like those first generation regen ag permaculture thinkers, if you will, there's this whole suite of publications that you can almost pick who studied under who and what generation of thinking they're in by the texts that they read, because that One Straw Revolution is one of them. The other ones was Farmers for 40 Centuries. The Green History of the World, I think, is another one. Popinal's Subtropical Fruit books. There's this suite of them.
Farmers' Factories of the Future by Kropotkin and so on. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It's interesting to me, the whole lineage thing.
You've had like a front row seat
Yeah, I have to an extent, being someone who started pretty early. But look. When I read that, then immediately I looked. Oh shit, this bloke's got some other books, and I can't remember. He wrote two other books, and there was one of them where he had a photo of himself. There was a photo of Fukuoka, Wes Jackson of the Land Institute, and this bloke Bill Mollison, and it said Bill Mollison from Australia. I went, oh. And I think it might have mentioned permaculture or whatever. And permaculture is sort of like this background word in stuff that I was reading, and the organic, because I was reading more about the organic farming and organic gardening and that sort of side of things. And I don't know, it just seemed to be this thing in the background. And anyway, I think it wasn't until 1993 that when I started doing the farm planning thing, I was thinking, what do you do? And I was looking around doing farm planning courses and this, that, and the other. And this course with Andrew Sheridan and Hugh Gravestein came up in southern New South Wales. So went up there and did that 2-week course, which was great. And then followed that with the course on farm planning at the University of Melbourne, which that was a sort of a keyline course with Rees Gravestein and Alan Lehman. So I had these three quite different courses and when you talk about lineages, quite different lineages. Obviously, keyline and permaculture are linked together through the agency of Yeomans and Mollison and Holmgren, both sort of standing on the shoulders in large part on Yeomans, but then the whole farm planning thing, that all came from soil conservation, which Yeomans was a bit influenced from in the start, but, separated from quite strongly. And then I met Bill Mollison in 95. I went up and did, I got into the Permi sort of thing for a while there, and I saw that he was running one of his last courses. Bill Mollison's last ever course. In 1995.
Sales.
Yeah, I did two. I taught with Bill on two of his last courses in 2001. Anyway, be that as it may, and I'd applied to do my diploma because I found out that you could do a diploma of permaculture design, and so I went up there with my X number of designs and blah blah, and I wanted to get him to sign my diploma right there, and then I wanted to get this thing physically in my hand. So I went up and did another PDC with him, with about 80 people sleeping on floors and having a great time. Yeah, smoking a lot of dope. And
was that in where's
Tyalgum? Tagari Farm.
Tagari.
Yeah. Then the next year I went up there and did an earthworks course with him, and there was only about 5 or 6 people, and we just smoked cigarettes and drank cups of tea from like 6 in the morning till 5 the next morning, just basically listening to Bill for about a week, and that was bloody awesome. And he was between wives, so he was free. And
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. I never had the pleasure of meeting Bill in person, but
well, my good friend Speedy Ward, who lives here now, he was Bill's sort of personal nurseryman, and they lived together on their farm, and so Speedy was there as well. So Bill was a bachelor at that point, so was Speedy, and and we go out and we do a bit of surveying, we build a couple of swales, and we sort of pushed. Old Doug Durrow was there, and we were using the dozer and doing this, that, and the other. We didn't actually do that much earthworks. We talked about it, but the rest of the time we just hung out with Bill and just...
Right. Have you been back there in recent years and had a look around at how it's succeeded?
I think I'm going to say the last time I went to Tagari was, I think, in 2002. Lisa Mollison, Bill's last wife, she asked me, and Bill asked me, I was working up there, and they asked me to go and have a look at it, because this English bloke, took it over, and he's gone on to other things. anyway, this English bloke sort of left it alone, or he might have been shifted on. I don't know the entire story, Byron, but something happened. Something happened.
Well, for those that don't know, this is a farm that Bill Mollison set up in northern New South Wales at a town called Tyalgum. That's in the caldera of Mount Warning, the volcano up there. And it was a playground for Mollison and friends for some years. And I had the pleasure of, I went there I've been there a couple of times, last in around 2012.
Yeah, right.
And it's fascinating to just see how there's been people squatting in it and da-da-da-da, but I mean, talk about biomass.
Yeah, it was... Well, I went there in 2002 after it had been abandoned by this English bloke for about 6 months after I think he was shifted on, moved on.
Oh, the pennies only just dropped us. Okay, yeah, go on.
So is this where I put my pleading falsetto on? Yeah. Anyway, they said, go and have a look at it. And you know, it's like you say, I mean, I find abandonment, and I've, having grown up on the gold fields, you sort of see, as you go, I used to ride around with my push bike with my brother, and we'd go to abandoned places and there'd be abandoned trees and da-da-da. So I've found, but, when you think about it, and as I was coming into that period of my life, actually looking at the ecological outcomes of the abandonment of cultivated ecosystems, it's very fascinating. So it would have been, amazing to have seen it yet another 10 years later, because, the Bill's built, there was sort of like two parts to that property. There was the original 5 acres I think he had, and then there was the rest of it, which was about another 150 or 200 acres or something. And Bill used to come up with crazy plans. Like, he had this really bizarre sort of business idea that, he'd say, all right, well, if I plant 100 mangoes, then he'd count how many mangoes they'd each produce, and then those mangoes would equal a living. Go and you can go and make your living on that. And I planted them and da-da-da-da-da. And it just didn't quite pencil out because, well, for a start, the mangoes were never taken care of.
The food forest technique.
So the whole cultivation part of this wasn't actually taken care of. And, they'd be smothered by blady grass.
Which is indicative of the kind of permaculture. There's a part of permaculture that permaculture gets critiqued a lot. I'll defend its core principles.
Sure, same. It's great.
Yeah, when you reduce it down to what I call permaculture with a capital P versus all of these kind of add-ons and plugins and whatnot, I'll defend it. But it is accused fairly often of a kind of head in the clouds, hippy-dippy idealism.
Well, it often attracts people like that, which is interesting because when you go back, like the early adopters of permaculture often were pretty, I would say a lot. There were quite a few people who were early adopters of permaculture who I saw were, let's just say, a lot more serious about it. It wasn't just I'm simplifying and people say different things, but it wasn't a gardening concept. It wasn't just a sustainability thing. That, they seem to understand it better from the perspective of the zones, and Mollison's Tagari property was a classic case of what I call zone 2.5, except zone 2.5 went over a broad acreage, and so there wasn't the human capacity to manage something of that zone intensity over that much area, right? So it should have been a zone 3 or 4 landscape, but it was actually managed. Well, the systems that were installed really should have been in zone 2. So they didn't. So as a result, the human resources and the human effort was spread really thinly. Put to that, Bill had this great dream of he really loved the Basque Mondragon model. And he used to talk about it all the time. It was like his this whole thing, which, and the Mondragon model, as I discovered afterwards, is, and people will correct me here, but was a Catholic family system of governance and shared enterprise and very collaborative enterprises. And it worked really well because they had the glue of family. Whereas when you tried to apply that using, for want of a better term, disparate hippies who've converged on a place, then without any skin in the game, it met a natural idea. It met the end that most idealistic projects do.
Some of the most dysfunctional enterprises I've ever seen have been permaculture farms. I was a woofer coordinator, and it was funny because on the one hand, I felt like I was living my dream, like a 20-something, whatever I was at the time, botanophile, and all these students coming from overseas, and just, it was just so invigorating and stimulating. And on the other hand, it was sending me goddamn insane, like just herding cats.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's a great movement and a great stepping stone in a lot of ways, but it's for me it was something that had its moment in my time, and it's way behind me now. So, but I like you. I look at permaculture now more so for the principles than the ethics. I don't. One of the people often say to us with our agrarians project, why don't you have a core of ethics? And I say, well, when you start to go down the ethic thing, when you start to put that in, well, then people start to get a bit weird. They start to get a bit, it starts to be a proxy for religion, and I don't want to go there. So we just stick to layers. It seems to work. Yeah, people can believe whatever they want to believe. I don't really give a shit, really.
You're a big fan of Mr. P.A. Yeomans.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. I never met him, so I don't know about him personally, but definitely of the Keyline plan. Yeah, definitely.
And you grew up on a farm in Bendigo. That was it. He had visited and planned, or he?
No, none at all. Not at all. No, it was interesting because I brought this up with my grandfather when I got into Yeomans pretty early in my farm planning career, and I brought the stuff home, and Granddad and I were talking, and the way Granddad, who did most of this development, he wasn't directly he hadn't read anything by Yeomans or whatever. But what was clear to us in our conversations about it was that, like so many people, this is I suppose the greatest influence of Yeomans is that when you develop a concept and then it gets spread. And it gets spread without that we're to the point where the people who are using some of those methods don't even know what it's called. I think that's true success. And I put this in our original business plan in 1993. At that stage I said I wanted to make I want to move permaculture from being a marginal methodology to an unconscious practice. And to a degree, or at least in the case of our farm, Keyline had become that, because the pervasiveness of Yeomans, a lot of people wouldn't appreciate this, but the pervasiveness of Yeomans, even in just dam designs, I mean, the kind of dam designs that Yeomans came up with didn't exist before him. The contour dam, the hillside dam, all of those things didn't exist before in the general Australian landscape. And you see this when you go to the United States. People build ponds and stuff there, but they don't build them where Australians do because they didn't have Yeomans. And they didn't, and the people in the US don't connect their dams like they do in Australia. They don't have water conservation channel. There's a lot of these different aspects. So we had all of that, and we had lock pipes and stuff. No one had lock pipes before Yeomans. So I say that our farm was designed and laid out according to some Keyline principles, But those principles were not known to my grandfather as keyline principles. Yeah, they were just things that were practices that had sort of gone, how could you say, without a name, without a label, as being what you did. So
when you began to consume Yeoman's work, and having had the background of growing up on a farm with those principles or similar,
with this silent influence,
right? And you recognise that as you were reading Yeoman's work. Do you remember?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's why I brought it back to Grandad. I said, "Did you read this bloke?" And he goes, "No." I mean, I knew Granddad's library. I've always been a big reader, and I know everyone's library. I guess it's the first place I go into someone's house. I go straight to their bookshelf. So I've always done that. So, no, he didn't have any books on that. Yeah. He didn't have any books on farm planning.
I've heard you say it before. In Australia, I don't know if it's surprising, something of a shame that the likes of Yeoman's isn't recognised more for what he's done and what he's contributed. And there's still not a unit in tertiary education that ever speaks to keyline design. And I mean, keyline is arguably the foundation. If you're going to pick something, it's the foundation of the greater regenerative agriculture movement. It'll be close to it.
Yeah, that and holistic management, I think. But, I suppose when you talk foundations, like there's so many different things, like there's organics and blah, blah, but organics doesn't, like there's no frameworks, Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Love a good framework.
Yeah. So that said, Yeoman's never developed a pedagogy, which I think was probably or part of how he didn't get as embedded as he might otherwise. Like a permaculture developed a pedagogy,
right, yep.
And so on. Holistic management's got a pedagogy. And so when you have, I know we've talked about this before, but when you have that pedagogy, well, then it creates a lineage which obviously makes the originators of that better known. You'll always associate permaculture in 200 years, we'll always know permaculture is Bill Mollison and David Holmgren's thing, right? Or that holistic management is Alan Savory's thing. But if we're talking in 200 years and keyline's sort of forgotten about, which it well could be, then it'll just be something obscure but people may well be using its practices still.
Yeah, well, I see the same here in southwestern Australia. There are people who use it and apply those principles who they don't know where it's come from. But how do you see the current, in search of a better term, folk culture in Australia, on ground, human hands in the dirt relationship between the Australian people, contemporary Australian peoples, and country, the national discussion and action on that relationship? I know that's a broad and vague.
No, I think it's a good question. I think it's superficial at best.
Right.
It's superficial. It's allowed to be superficial through the agency of social media because this is my belief anyway, and observation, is that the agency of social media, and I think even myself I've been subject to this to an extent, is being that you can very quickly become expert at something superficially without having any connection to something. And so, if you look at a lot of people who are farm-to-table producers, for example, primary producers who sell direct to their market, well, of course, they're on social media. They have to be. And so if you're one of the people who consume, if that's your choice of consumption, you go out there and choose producers who sell directly, well, then you'll be following their social media and you'll be all over them. But it's still pretty superficial. You've never actually engaged in, and again I'm generalising, but you've never actually engaged in what it actually is like to be that producer or to be engaged in that sort of level of production. So the relationship, and I think that somewhat similarly, and I think this is even true for some Aboriginal people, unfortunately, is because they lack, so many of them lack initiation, that as do Europeans, that the connection to country that once would have been intrinsic and complete is just not there. So, unless it's mountain biking or hiking or this, that, or the other, then it's occasional, but it's certainly not complete. But I don't know whether our economic circumstances actually allow us to have that, to have a full level of completion, because we have to make too much money to be able to survive in this environment. So that makes it very, very difficult for people, even people who live on the land. The volume of cash that you've got to generate spreads you pretty thin.
My word. Yeah, my word. It feels like the Australian sense of self-identity going back a few years or even decades at this point carried a strong theme of outdoorsiness, and I don't know how much of that was legitimate, how much of it was kind of crocodile Dundeeism, but it feels to me like over the last decade at least, there's been a massive disconnect from country. And I mean, even in, quite just mundane and trite ways, it just feels like once upon a time, everyone knew someone with a family member who was on a farm. If not your own uncle or, the next door neighbor, and you'd always have the farm to go to and the childhood memories. If you didn't grow up on one yourself, Easter's on the farm and da-da-da. Even just from that level, it feels like there's such a disconnect, and no one gets out anymore. If you look at like the North American outdoorsmanship, if you will. Now, I mean, they're not a kind of sit around and kumbaya kind of mob, but just their hunting, their camping, in many ways, their culture seems to have a far more explicit connection to going out on the land compared to where Australians are.
Well, I know that when I go camping, it's with an esky full of grog and and a bunch of mates, and there's not much. People go, let's go. No one says let's go for a hike and see what the landscape's like. I might get on the boat and go and cruise along the river or wherever we are, which I enjoy doing. I'm a fisherman's arsehole, but but that's it. I was thinking while you were speaking then, Byron, of what you were saying, and I remember having a conversation in England with what's his name? Kevin Macaranis, I think his name was. Anyway, Kevin and I think Kevin was an Englishman of Indian extraction. His family, his first generation Indian Englishman. And anyway, we were talking about the cricket, and of course, the usual banter. And we had a three-way banter because he loved the English team, he loved the Indian team, and both of them hate Aussies. So anyway, we were talking about that, and I was saying, well, look, I said, and this relates to what you're saying. I said, I don't think Australia will have a very good team in the future because of what I saw, and this was in 2011. It was actually the Rex, or the precursor, the RAD at Cowdrey in 2011. And I said to him, I don't see that the next generation of kids are participating much in organised sport. So, which is an extension of that, what you've just said, because sport relates to outdoors, sport relates to, being a country Australian, sporting clubs, which is a great distinction. Bit of the distinctiveness of Australian rural culture is that your participation and engagement with other people is built around clubs and club life. and the levels of participation in that are horrendously bad. So, writ large by, abandoned tennis courts everywhere, football teams that merge, so they've got 7 names in one club, and on it goes. And that also is a problem that leads to Australia declining as a cricketing nation, because there's just not the pool anymore.
And that even from a less organised kind of official position of clubs, it's that, I don't even know what term, street or folk culture, where one pictures a young Don Bradman hitting a golf ball off a corrugated iron with a cricket stump, honing his skills. There are parts of the world, in India, I dare say, there's probably far more gangs of kids playing cricket in the street. Like my partner, a Brazilian, all the kids are out playing soccer in the street still. In Australia, I don't see kids kicking the footy.
It's too dangerous out there on the streets. There's cars, and it's just messy, Byron. It's not going to work.
Yeah, the ghettos of Australia.
So there's all of that, which you're right. And so the participation that goes with sport, which, then flies, you're outside. As I wrote in the Agrarian's Handbook in the buildings chapter, I wrote about my nana. I started one of the sections there saying, don't come inside. It's the section on tiny houses. I said, she used to say, don't come inside unless unless you are to be fed or to go to bed. And that then related, because she didn't want us inside, upsetting her and being a pain in the ass. Come inside if you're there to work and help her can fruit or clean up or bring wood inside or whatever else. But don't come into the house because you're just a pain in the ass. So what do? You're outside. So stay outside or given a job or whatever else. And, of course, my corollary conversation with that from the perspective of tiny houses is that everyone lived in a tiny house once because you weren't allowed to be inside.
Right.
But now you've got to accommodate you. Your parents will go crazy, if you're in.
Well, now every new house has a bloody cinema room built into it.
Well, yeah, exactly. Every room has a bathroom.
When I was a kid, especially on weekends, we'd wake up at the crack of dawn and jump on our bikes and head down to the river and proceed to get absolutely filthy and skin our knees and, eat earthworms or whatever we did and fall out of trees and get home at about, 6 o'clock as the sun was setting, and Mum would say, where have you been? And we said, down the river. She said, fine, okay, wash your hands, dinner's nearly ready. Now, if a kid's not in the yard, it's a national emergency.
Well, and it's quite likely you'll have human services come around. I've heard recently a friend's mother who got in trouble because she had pretty free-range kids. And I looked at the behaviours of those kids and I thought, crikey. I even thought the other day I was walking to work walking into here the other day at about 4:30, 4:45, because I make bread here. And something I'm doing on the side because I've always been interested in it. And there's a bloke driving along. I heard this bloke driving around quite erratically, and he was delivering newspapers in plastic wrapped newspapers. And I thought, I used to do that when I was 11, 12, 13. I'd get $12 a week and get up at 4:35, ride 20 minutes away to the newsagent, fill my bike up with newspapers and go around the neighbourhood in the dark with shitty lights or no lights delivering newspapers.
The non-issue.
That would break every child labour law known to man now, apart from the fact that your parents would be worried sick of you. They'd have a GPS tracker. On it would go. So it's pretty well legal to be a free-range kid now. You just don't see that. You just don't see. If you did see a kid riding like a 7-year-old, like I was, riding around on my push bike, just being in the world, someone would pull you up and apprehend you. So, it all goes to this, Byron. I don't know who thought this shit up, but it is what it is now, unfortunately.
It is. It also feels like that just about the entirety of the human-country relationship at the moment in Australia is mediated by the state. Like if you so much as pick one bloody wildflower, you know, you'll get a slap on the wrist. Or if you go like hunting, you know, people, international listeners might not realize, and North American listeners would probably be shocked to discover that we are not allowed to hunt any native Australian animals here. You can hunt the feral animals. We've got plenty of them, but Australian animals are off limits. And even then, it's very, very difficult to get a gun license in many cases.
And it's not really hunting, it's shooting as opposed to hunting.
Explain.
Well, hunting is where you actually go out. There's a whole culture of going out and for days or whatever, wearing the gear and having devices. I mean, if you spent any time in North America or in fact in Northern Europe or elsewhere and going hunting with people, it's a whole practice of hunting down an animal, whereas here we hunt roos with a spotlight on the top of a ute, and it's done from a distance and
may or may not do anything with the carcass.
Exactly. It's not with the purpose of actually eating that or having it as a trophy. Or I mean, you don't see anybody here with busts of the great buck of Bendigo kangaroo. You know, there's none of that. In the trophy room. Taxidermy's a pretty shitty trade here, I reckon.
Hey, I got a thing for taxidermy, mate.
Yeah, I know. Get stuffed.
Sleeping with stuffed animals. So if you, Darren Doherty, if you suddenly found yourself as Emperor of Australia, and I think you're in with a chance as good as anyone. Of course, we're playing kind of, make a wish, wave a magic wand kind of stuff.
Oh, are we? Oh, damn.
What would you do, if anything, to foster a greater connection between the Australian people and the country that they're on, if anything?
Well, I think the first thing that would have to happen would be to empower, however we can, the First Australians, the First Nations people of this continent, because as Victor Stephenson said quite famously a couple of years ago, how about you sit in the passenger seat and we'll take the wheel for a while, because clearly, with exceptions, clearly the European experiment here has probably not gone so well. On a whole lot of levels. And so I think that would be the first step, would be to, and that involves, of course, going through a makarata on all of that too. I mean, the land's not happy with us, clearly. So I think that there's got to be a makarata with the land somehow, and as well as with the First Nations people. So I think that I don't notice I say not our First Nations people, which people tend. It's that paternalistic colonialism that just doesn't seem to be able to be taken from the language. Our First Nations people.
It runs
deep.
Was it William Burroughs? William Burroughs, who said that English is a parasitic thought form from outer space, or something to that effect.
I hadn't heard that, but it's not too far off it. As with a lot of other European languages. So I think that's the first step. And look, it's without getting too idealistic about it, because that's it. And the other part of it, I suppose, too, Byron, is I don't think so centrally. I think that it's important to when you say, the emperors tend to be centrist sort of characters, and they're not necessarily very conciliatory or don't encourage much participation. They're not empowering sort of characters. So one would have to cast that archetype off pretty quickly.
It's your fantasy, mate. You can.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, I don't know if I've talked to you. I think about the king of Morocco, right? One of the few monarchs of his legal capacity in the world, and I think if I was at a dinner party with him, I've thought, because I've spoken about this when I've been in Morocco and elsewhere. You look, you've been to Morocco and you go around and you go, fuck me, this place is so damn close. It's one of those places that's breaking down before your eyes. But
you can literally see the change in the landscape shapes from humid to arid.
Yeah, you can, and you go, bloody hell! If I had the power here, what would I do? And he's got a parliament, and he's got the institutions, and he's got the apparatus there to actually just provide a direction to say, hey, we love this place. And what does that love? How can that love actually be expressed? And I think in part, well, that would be part of what I'd try to imbibe here would be, is this the way to treat your parent? Is this that way? Because this is pretty bad. So that's why I think there needs to be a makarata before you actually get to, as we have in the human context in the Australian Aboriginal, or at least some of the nations here, the process towards reconciliating our relationship with the land, and not as Europeans, but as people who are here, because so much of the relationship that those of us who have got European descent and carry on with the European ways, which is global now. I mean, everyone's functionally a European now, legally, culturally,
Roman,
fashionably.
All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah, all that. All of that. You've got to. There's got to be some casting off of that, that's a major structural change, and I think.
Well, indeed, and it's only getting tighter. I mean, you've got releases from the Davos Institute, the Great Reset, and all of this surveillance capitalism and greenwashing of surveillance capitalism, and I mean, autonomy of the individual, or the regional autonomy or regional identity of a people is just slipping out the window as there's further and further consolidation of power and centralizing of power. So it's like there's this kind of race between that and the grassroots organic kind of expression and yearning from the human heart for place and meaning. And if you were an emperor and you were to articulate what you just said, how you would like the Moroccan king to act, I reckon people would weep with relief and gratitude. Like in the human heart, I think it's there and it's strong.
You'd have to, well, you see, I think it's interesting. I mean, you'd have to communicate it really well. I mean,
of course,
kings are representatives of God. Emperors put themselves on a plate to be a representative of God. That's usually how it works. That's the quid pro quo in the human psyche. And if you're talking about the new model of emperorship, which is godless, let's say, which is a secular emperor, which
it's explicitly godless.
Yeah, then that's a challenging one, because people have then got to have a proxy for God, and that's tended to not go down so well in the human experiment so far. I've done I keep reading as much as I can. And I've been over the holidays. I took a long break because my dad died, and so I.
Sorry to hear that.
I had it. Yeah, no, that's all right, mate. And he died in early December, and which we were expecting. He had cancer for a long time, and so on. But I helped Mum a lot with that, and then I just needed some time. We'd worked really hard here, and we'd not had any time home for a long time. So I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot more than what I would ordinarily. And my theme of these holidays was reading theme, I suppose, was liberalism and communism, and looking at not necessarily origins, but looking at people who've been influenced. Because often when you're looking at origins, like if you read Marx and Engels, then it's a bit too straitjacketed, because it's like when you're reading, it's like when you read about permaculture and you just read Mollison. You actually want to read someone who, well, I think, I'm more interested in reading second, third generations and the interpreters of that, and how it actually, how the real rubber hits how the real rubber hits the real road, not the idealistic originator.
Like the Talmud to the Torah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it was interesting because I suppose, and it's always difficult to sort of put to one side the influences of well-written pieces, but I'm a great believer in the individual. From the perspective that we all wake up each day with ourselves, and then we find ourselves, if we're lucky, next to someone and around others in a family, and so on, and in a community. But we still, we're inside of our own heads, and we have to deal with that. So when it comes down to having some great leader, I think where we have to get to in the next step is to be able to have great leaders, because there always will be leaders. It's just the way the world works and the way human society hierarchies work, I believe. We need to have those who actually enliven in others that love, like you said. What is it that makes you want to love? And when if someone was able to do that, well, then I think that things would be very different. I mean, I don't know if you've read Joel Salatin, who's a friend, and as you know, he wrote a really great piece. I think the best book he's written, from my perspective, was The Marvellous Pigness of the Pig. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's his challenge to evangelical Christians to get their shit together when it comes to domain, and which is Genesis domain, which was given to Jews first, and then to Christianity and to Islam as well, and they've just dropped that ball completely. I mean, it's all been, the domain part has not been about love and cherishing and at all. It's been about being an abusive father, basically, and that's how it's rolled, and that's got to change. I mean, that's fundamental in us, and I think that from all that I've been reading lately and for a long time, I think that structurally needs to change, and to an extent, it is. It's difficult with the gender discussion that sort of, I think, in some part, and this sort of smashing of the patriarchy, I think that's a distraction from us actually all just saying, okay, we're a human first, we're a person first. Let's just focus on that, and let's focus on this other thing, that we're also a participant in an ecosystem, and that ecosystem allows us to be who we are and to do what we do. And unless we actually love it and cherish it and nurture it, well, then that's not going to be there anymore for us. And all that we love and enjoy and benefit from will either become a lot harder, or it will go away. And that's not so great. But it's such a slow burn. I mean, the earth is so fucking tough. That's what I mean. You go to a Morocco and you think, bloody hell, that place is tough. It just takes one little...
It's copped it.
Yeah, and Australia's the same. I've seen Australia so many times, it's had drought. And it's just like, you think, fuck, this is going to just go bad. And then 100 mil of rain comes and you can just see it just go, oh, what's the worry? What's the worry? Oh, another one. And humans are like that, I think. We're built like that. We've been chasing the earth around, and we're the great opportunist as a species. And I think perhaps that's when you're an opportunist, you're always on the edge, aren't you? I don't know. It's a hard one. Because no one's built the same either. So trying to, I think the love thing, like you put it, is the best thing to think. But you got to bring that horse to the water, haven't you? How can you make someone love something?
This is, you know what? I have come many, many times in my head. I've come around to that, the answer being love and wisdom. And as vacuous and hallmark cardy and oversaturated as it sounds, I can't escape it. It's just like, I don't think there's a goddamn thing we could invent. It's all about wisdom and love. But how do you foster that? How do you certainly can't mandate.
Well, you got to own up.
How do you manufacture?
Well, you got to own up to love.
Right.
I think it's interesting. My old mate Joe Palacia, who I wrote about this morning actually in a piece. He got a brain tumor, and he was he's a really fit guy. I think did you ever meet Joe? Yeah.
In California, in the US?
No. Joe was in New Zealand. That's right.
No, I don't.
Yeah, he had Rainbow Valley Farm. He was Austrian bloke, but he lived there for decades. Anyway, he was fit as a fiddle, and he got a bloody brain tumor, and it killed him. Anyway, Joe was one of those blokes who carried the world on his shoulders. You know, he was worried about a lot, and worried about the fate of humanity, worried about the fate of the earth, and blah blah blah, and carried that pretty strongly. And anyway, towards the end of his life, and he was he loved protesting and arguing and just being obstinate and whatnot. And towards the end of his life, he actually wrote a passage where the penny finally dropped. I'm about to die. What really matters, and it was love. And that he wrote a piece about it, which I when I spoke at the permaculture convergence in Sydney, with the permission of his wife, I had to do a talk there on farm planning or whatever, and because I was a good mate of Joe's and still am of his wife, and Trish, and I asked permission if I could read this piece out. And I remember looking over at Bill Mollison, who was there, and Bill was pretty old at the time, and he was crying because he knew. But, it's a similar thing. It's sort of, and a lot of people were, because the words were so true. I've done, he put so much effort into the fight without realising that it was actually love that was going to happen. And I think Joel came to that conclusion a lot earlier than others. And he speaks of that. He speaks of treating the earth as if you would, and giving it your caress as you would to a lover. That's a tenderness. That's a tenderness which hopefully most people enjoy in their time. Whether it's a nice word from your grandma, or whether it's a good a nice word from a stranger, or whatever, however it comes.
My friends and I in Margaret River, we've taken to singing to country. And it actually occurred to me when I was listening to.
So you've memorised Kumbaya then?
Yeah, dude. Have I not played you my version?
I think you should have that. I think that you should have that as the
intro music to the Octarine.
As the title music. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Do you know Terence Mckenna? Are you familiar with him? Okay. Well, he was kind of like my philosophy dad. Many people would know of Terence McKenna, but very, very cerebral and one of these hyper thinkers and incredibly articulate. And anyway, without going into too much of what he did and what he was very, very brainy and cerebral. And he was on his deathbed in Hawaii with dying of a brain tumor. And I'm not sure if it was his last words, but it was close to it. He was quoted as saying on his deathbed something to the effect of, "Oh my God, it's all about love. It's all about the heart. It's all about love," as he was on his way out.
Yeah, well, my friend Eugenio Grass, who died last year, I don't know what he had another brain tumour too early. I imagine he probably had similar things, but he was already on that journey. Yeah, that's where it is, Byron. Great question.
Thank you. My connection's actually getting a bit wobbly, and you've had a long day full of baking bread and doing whatever else you do when the camera's not on you.
Well, you know that I'm indefatigable, Byron.
You are indefatigable. You're the first. I learned that word off you because you were self-described as indefatigable. But what the fuck is indefatigable?
Oh, well, in fact, one of the best things about saying that word is when you say it like a toffee English, when you go, indefatigable. You puff your cheeks up. Indefatigable.
It'd be a great catchphrase for some character, actually. Indefatigable. Yeah. All right, mate. Darren Doherty. Did I do it again? I butchered it.
Oh no, that's beautiful. No, you're getting there. It's amazing what some West Australians are capable of.
Oh, thank you, patronising prick. Darren Doherty.
Oh, patronising Victorian, I think you meant to say.
Indefatigable Victorian. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Oh, my pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. How many people have been before me, Byron? Just curiously.
You are actually the second.
Oh,
but the other guy didn't. The other guy didn't mean anything, mate. Really, you're the one.
All this love talk, just made me want to get it clear. That was all.
Yeah, you're the one, mate. The other one was an accident.
Oh, yeah. Scheduling mix up, no doubt.
Where quickly can people find you and your work?
They just go to Agrarians. I did a Google search for Agrarians. We've totally dominated. There's anything but. It's great. So you just Google Agrarians, and I think you can go for like 33 pages on Google.
And you're it.
Well, it's not me. See, this is one of the things, Byron. I've tried to take me out of it because otherwise it all gets a bit populist, and the cult of the personality shines through, which I don't want to have.
Which is why you, sir, will never be emperor.
That's true. Oh, my world has just come crashing down.
Yeah. Sorry, buddy.
And on that note...
All right, mate. Thank you for having joined us.
No worries. Thanks for the opportunity, my friend. Brother Byron.
We went to find the octarine tree, for legends claimed it healed one's mind. So off we pressed into the night, with naught but guesses as our guide. And though we drifted without sight, somehow we seemed to drift toward the light. We wandered wide in stiffened circles, with mere glimpses of the path. We learned to carry others' names. We lost a few upon the way, and though our twisting made us tired, a spiral softer than a lie. is how our roots must grow.